What is going on, guys? Car Guy V8 here with another small block Chevy video. And the issues that this one was having had me so perplexed that the engine is fully blown apart in the garage and every part is taken off of it, because this is the engine that I mentioned last week was going in my Camaro. I put it in, ran absolutely terribly. Now it's fully disassembled in the garage. So let me tell y'all what was going on and what I found. So once I got the engine, the only thing that I did was an oil change, and I threw it in the car and I fired it up. Now there were three main issues that I had, and all of them are perplexing, so I'll try to go over them one at a time. The timeline may not be exact, but I'll cover all three issues. So once I got it fired up, I immediately noticed that it ran pretty bad, very poorly. And so you first thought would be timing, carburetor, or some distributor issue or something like that. So I put an ohm meter on the coil, while the cap was still in the car. I put it on the coil, and I noticed it did read out of range. So I was like, easy fix. So I have several old caps out in the shed. So I put one on that read correctly with my ohm meter, and the car ran a whole lot better, but it still ran poorly. So right after that, I decided to put my timing light on it, because at this point I had timed it by ear. And to my surprise, it would only run about 20 to 25 degrees at initial timing, which is way too high. Many factory small blocks were set at like 6 degrees or 4 degrees before top dead center at initial. So this one was running way advanced. And once you get into the throttle and get onto the mechanical advance, you'll be way up in pinging territory with that kind of initial. And so I was like, So I threw a different distributor on, and there was no change. And after that, I checked the balancer compared to, the timing mark with the piston all the way up on the compression stroke, which doesn't really matter when checking, where the mark is, which stroke you're on. But just to make sure I had it timed exactly right, I had it on the compression stroke, piston all the way up, balancer was dead on it. Once I had it disassembled like it is in the garage now, I verified, and it is dead on. So for whatever reason, it did not want to idle or run very well below about 20-something degrees initial timing, which is crazy. I still haven't figured that part out myself. And I changed the distributor another time. So that is 3, maybe 4 different distributors. Like I said, I don't remember everything because I went through everything with this vehicle. And still, another issue which I haven't mentioned yet is it was always misfiring on cylinder 7, which I attribute some of the rough running to that. It was usually whenever it was cold, you could hear a bum 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 bum, but it was still firing on that cylinder. It was just it wasn't firing as well. So I changed the spark plug out twice. I changed the plug wire out a couple times. No change there. When it was warmed up, it would do better, but that cold start, you would hear it misfiring through the exhaust down there. And I will say that I put a compression tester on this engine, and the suspect cylinder number 7, which was misfiring, was 150 psi. And for a 76cc head with a dish piston, 150 psi is just fine. So at least according to the compression tester, there was nothing wrong with that cylinder. And like I said, different spark plug, different wires, it would still misfire. So these were just perplexing issues. And once I actually did get it on the road, it ran bad, but it ran somewhat okay up until it was warm, and it would start knocking. And by these other videos, that I posted of the engine running, you can see how rough it was running. And once it was warm, it was knocking. So I decided I don't think there's anything I can do with this car or with this engine while it's in the car. I swapped the carburetor once just to check. I even retarded the timing down to where it was running absolutely terribly just to make sure the knock wasn't a spark knock. And no matter what, so this engine was knocking, it was misfiring, and it was running absolutely terrible. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to pull this thing out, and I'm going to tear it apart, and I'm going to see what I can find. So let's go take a look at what I found. So let me show y'all what I got going on here. So here's the 010 block with all the parts that I took out of it. And this is actually a 4-bolt main. I did not know that until I tore into it. And it's an 020 block. So technically, even though this is a myth, This would be one of the sought after high nickel blocks. If you want to put merit in that, go right ahead. I don't really. But this would have been a sought after block. And at every point of tearing this thing down, I was surprised with how good it actually looked. Like, I think it did not have too many miles on it. It was in a 68 C10. And my guess is it was probably one of those that set quite a bit and was only driven, you know, on the occasional weekend or to the occasional car show. So who knows how old this rebuild is, but I don't think it has a lot of miles on it. It's just clean. You can see some of that stuff. I don't know what that is. I'm thinking that's just from condensation or something from being, like I said, sitting more than it was driven. Look at that. It's just like, it's almost like an old crusty oil or something on there that just never quite came off. It's not rust, but lifter bores are clean. Every lifter was rotating. I don't have the cam right here. I gave it to Clay and all the lifters, because if I'm going through the trouble of throwing a budget rebuild into this thing, I couldn't live with myself if I went back with a basically stock camshaft. But here are the heads. So remember, I said it was always misfiring on cylinder 7, and I can't figure out why just by looking at it. I'm going to get them checked out by a machine shop. But like I said, this whole thing, I don't think it had very many miles on it. Just look how clean the cylinder heads were on both sides of them, actually. They look really good. I bet the machine shop's going to say they're just fine. Look, they've still got the void if removed little tags on the back, but they're pretty clean. I'm surprised at how much casting material, sorry, this light sometimes does that. I'm surprised at how much casting material is still in the ports on both the intake and the exhaust. They're rough, but they're 882 heads. Intake, just typical intake. Nothing really special about it. I didn't find anything wrong taking a look at it. Head gaskets, very clean. Nothing was blown. They don't look that old. Pistons, let me grab one of these suckers, number 6. They all look pretty good. All look about the same. Nothing crazy about any of this stuff. I believe the source of the knock was the number 3 rod bearings. They are quite rough. In fact, all of the rod bearings are pretty bad, but this one is the worst, number 3. Number 2 is pretty bad too. Get that up there where y'all can see. 7 and 8 weren't too bad, but they're certainly worse than what you want. You could kind of catch a nail, so yeah, I would call those bad. Certainly worse than what I would like to see in it. But I think the main issue was that number 3 and the number 2 rod bearing. Number 1 was not pretty either. But when I took this by the machine shop, he said this could certainly cause a knock. So that's both of number 3 there. Very rough. So number 3 on the crankshaft here, you can see it looks a little rough. Luckily, you can't catch a nail on it. He put a micrometer on it. He said it is 0.02 of an inch out of round. So he said it would polish up probably. They don't look pretty, but you can't catch a nail on anything. I forgot I didn't show y'all the actual main caps. They're not bad. I mean, they're a little rough, but all of them looked about the same. Really not too bad. That's just oil in that one. But yeah, 4-bolt main. Check that sucker out. The back rear main bearing here was a little rougher, but nothing too crazy. It is 1 week later, and I reassembled the entire bottom end with fresh bearings, cleaned up the crank. The crank is 30 thousandths undersized, so I think I'm just gonna throw a budget rebuild on this thing. I've already cleaned up the deck surface, a little dirty from putting in the pistons. There's some oil on it, but cleaned out all the bolt holes for the head bolts. cheap rebuild. Hopefully bearings fix pretty much all the issues. I still don't know why it wouldn't run unless it was really advanced. That's the one thing I can't figure out. But I'm gonna get the heads checked out, and I'm gonna thoroughly check the intake soon. And I'm willing to bet, going back together, this thing's gonna run like a new engine. So that's what I'm gonna do. Comment down below if you have any thoughts or suggestions on what might have been causing some of the stuff, because really, other than the bearings, I haven't found a single thing wrong with this. I've looked for cracks, I've looked for, I've thoroughly looked throughout this engine, and the bearings were the only thing bad on it. So I'm still kind of perplexed. I'm thinking either the heads or the intake, those are the only things left. So let me know what you think, guys.